ready to go? All righty. Okay, friends, I'm going to call this special Saline City Council work meeting to order at 7:01 p.m. We're going to try our best this evening to keep this as close to an hour as possible. Members present this evening are myself, Mayor Morrow, Council members Dillon, Gearbaugh, McClellan, Rhodes, and CO. Councilwoman Tahar will be absent this evening. From city staff, we have City Manager Campbell, Clerk Royal, Treasurer Bennett, Wastewater Treatment Superintendent Skull, and City Engineer Rubel. The rest of you who are in the audience this evening, if you'd be so kind to sign in the back to my left, we would appreciate that. At this time, the chair would entertain a motion to approve the agenda as amended. Most of the evening will be occupied with the wastewater treatment plant odor study, but we'd also like to add a brief discussion on the North Ann Arbor streetscape. And there are some supplemental materials that the city manager distributed earlier this evening. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Rhodes. Is there a second? Second. Seconded by Councilwoman Dillon. All those in favor of approving the agenda as amended signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. The motion carries unanimously, which leads us to the first of our two discussion items this evening, which is the wastewater treatment plant odor study. Obviously, as all of you know, because I believe everyone at the table toured our wastewater treatment plant, we just concluded a multi-million-dollar rehab of that facility, which I think as Mr. Skull and Mr. Campbell and the rest of city staff would concur went very well. And will ultimately improve the plant in a number of ways. But we have had some persistent odor issues that many of the neighbors have experienced over the last year and a half, maybe 2 years. And obviously that has an impact on quality of life. And so we want to resolve this problem quickly but also thoroughly. Staff did some work over the last couple months on a odor analysis, and we have some guests with us, of course, this evening. And I guess with that, unless there are questions from me, I will turn it over to our city manager to maybe provide some additional background on this issue and then to introduce our guests.
Well, actually, I think you did a pretty nice job of summarizing everything. So, but as council knows that staff put out an RFP and for an odor study to help determine, narrow down the cause and come up with solutions to make some significant improvements. But having said that, we did go for RFPs, and we had, I believe, 5 or 6 different firms that had shown interest and contacted Gary and staff to get more details for a possible proposal. However, the only ones that submitted were Webster Environmental Associates. So Jim Ross is here. Well, I should say it's a partnership between Webster and Tetra Tech. So Gary, I don't know if you had anything, or we just want to turn, or Bob, before we just turn over to Jim and let him do his presentation. Unless there's any questions or comments for myself or other staff members.
Gentlemen, we welcome you here this evening. For our audience's benefit, and I believe the city clerk can confirm this, are we recording the meeting this evening? Yes. Please be sure to speak into the microphone, but the floor is yours. I believe you have a PowerPoint, which everyone on council was also provided a copy. But again, the floor is yours. We welcome you here, and if you want to go through your presentation, then maybe at the end we'll work our way around the table and address any questions, concerns that council members have. Okay. Thank you. And yes, you're welcome to use that. The podium and the microphone there, if you would prefer. There's a cordless mic off to your left.
Okay.
Can
you hear me through this? Is that okay?
Apparently the cordless isn't working, so my apologies.
Okay, sure. Thank you. So Webster is teamed with Tetra Tech to perform the odor study at the Saline wastewater treatment plant. Webster Environmental will be performing all of the odor control specialty work. Tetra Tech will be providing local coordination and also odor investigation associated with odor complaints. I know you're already familiar with Tetra Tech, so I did want to take an opportunity just to introduce ourselves as Webster Environmental to the council. Webster Environmental is an engineering consulting firm that has specialized in odor control for the past 35 years. That is all we do every day. During those 35 years, we have conducted over 600 odor control projects all around the country and also outside of the country as well. And we do a gamut of odor control engineering from the study phase to performance evaluations of existing systems to the actual design of the odor control systems. Just to share a couple of case studies of how a project can proceed, this is a case study of an odor study that we did for a client in Florida at a wastewater treatment plant, again similar to the treatment plant here. We conducted an odor study. We evaluated the existing conditions and recommended a two-stage odor control system for that plant. We conducted the design. The construction was completed in 2013 with overall 90%, greater than 90% reduction in odors from that plant. Another case study, this was for a client in Ohio, similar type study, wastewater treatment plant, similar to here. In this particular one, we conducted an odor study and a master plan for the wastewater treatment plant. The client was spending $700,000 a year in chemicals associated with odor control. We recommended a biological odor control system. We conducted that design. The construction for that project was completed in 2012, and that resulted in 97% odor removal. And the final case study I wanted to share, this was for a client in Kentucky that we did. They had existing chemical scrubbers, similar again to the ones here at the Saline treatment plant. They were spending $300,000 a year for the chemicals for those scrubbers. We recommended the replacement of those chemical scrubbers with a biological system. We conducted the design of that, and those systems are in place now. The chemical scrubber has been replaced by those biological scrubbers with an estimated 20-year cost savings of $3.5 million. So the treatment plant here. So there is two existing odor control systems at the treatment plant that are treating odors from a variety of different processes. There's also untreated areas in the plant. Some of those have been covered. Some of those have not been covered. So there has been work done at the plant to try to mitigate some of the odors that are at the plant. But at the same time, there's still odors being detected off-site, so something needs to be done. So the questions that need answers. Are the existing chemical scrubbers performing as designed? Is there a more cost-effective technology that can be employed? Are there other significant odor sources that need to be controlled? And what's the current odor impact of the existing facilities in the community? How much odor control is required? And then at the end of the day, what are the most efficient, lowest cost means of meeting the odor control objectives? And so our approach is outlined there, and I won't go through all of these because the remainder of the presentation will cover this, but our approach is meant to answer each one of those questions. So the first thing we want to do is we want to get everybody together and define the project. So we want to clearly define what are the objectives, what are the goals, what's our existing conditions. We're going to get on the site and meet with the engineering and the O&M staff, and we're going to review the existing data, the existing information, and do some preliminary air testing at the site to determine...
Come to my house.
Come to your house. Do some preliminary air testing at the site to identify what are the processes that we need to hone in on in our sampling and testing program. And from that preliminary air testing and those meetings, we're going to develop a comprehensive sampling and analysis program. And this is really the meat of what the study is all about. The sampling and analysis program is composed of air testing, liquid testing, and also airflow and air pressure testing. So as we go to the plant, we're going to go to each one of the potential odorous sources, potential processes, and we're going to conduct air testing. And that air testing has three different components to it that are listed up there. The first one is hydrogen sulfide monitoring. I don't want to get too much into the details of all of this and bore everybody, but I want to give you enough to have a basic understanding of what we're doing. The purpose of hydrogen sulfide monitoring is hydrogen sulfide is an indicator compound, and it's something that's easily measured, and it's something that we have devices that can measure it continually. So hydrogen sulfide is not a grab sample where we go out and we take a snapshot and just test it and walk away, and we only have that time and place for that sample. Hydrogen sulfide monitoring, the devices we can put in place in various parts of the plant at various processes, and they can record hydrogen sulfide concentrations for us every minute of the day for several days. So that means that at night, when we're not there, subsequent days when we're not there, that monitor is going to keep measuring and getting us data for those processes. And that gives us diurnal patterns. Is it changing at night? Is it changing during the day? Because the reality is that someone can't be there testing 24/7 every minute of the day. It's just not feasible. The second part of the air testing is reduced sulfur compound testing. And that is a snapshot in time. So we're going to identify the different processes that we're looking at, and we're going to identify ones that we're going to take grab samples. And we're going to take air samples from these processes, and we're going to send it to a lab for analysis. And that detailed analysis doesn't just look for one compound, such as hydrogen sulfide. It's going to look for a litany of compounds that can be potentially odorous. And the reason why that's important is that we have to know what's in the airstream in order for us to design properly the proper technology to remove that compound. If there's compounds in there that we didn't know that were there and we choose the wrong technology, it may not be able to remove that compound. Certain technologies can remove certain compounds, and certain technologies cannot remove other compounds. So we have to know what's in that airstream. So that's the purpose of that. The final bit of the air testing is odor panel testing, and that is also taking air samples from those processes and sending it to a lab. And what they're going to do is they're going to present that air sample to panelists, to human panelists that are going to sniff that air. And they're going to continue to dilute that air over and over and over and over and over again until they render it non-detectable. And so the number of dilutions it requires gives us the relative strength of that odor. And that odor panel testing results gives us some valuable things, and I'll talk about that later. So the other thing we'll do is also test the liquid at each one of these processes, the things that pertain to the release of odorous compounds. That would be the wastewater temperature, pH, the ORP of it, and the dissolved and total sulfides. We're also going to test the airflow and pressure of covered sources. The next thing we want to do is evaluate the performance of the existing chemical scrubbers. We want to find out, how are they performing? Are they performing as they're supposed to be? Are they performing as designed? Are they treating the air to an acceptable range, or are they not? We want to evaluate the annual cost of the chemicals. And at the end of the day, we want to determine, are they effective? Or is there something better? So we're going to take our data, we're going to evaluate the results. We're going to identify and quantify the odor-causing compounds, evaluate the chemical scrubbers as we just discussed, and we're going to look at the other sources that are not controlled currently, that are not covered or not treated. What needs to be done there? At the end of the day, we want to find out what's causing the issues. Going back to our odor panel analysis that I was talking about before, once we have the relative strength of odor of these different sources, the reason why that's important is because the human nose doesn't care if it's methyl mercaptan in the air, or if it's hydrogen sulfide, or if it's dimethyl sulfide, or we don't care. We just say, it smells. I don't like it. I don't care what's in it. It just smells. That's what the odor panel tells us, is how bad does it smell? Once we have those results in, something that is useful to us is that then we can rank the sources, the different processes at the plant. So this is one from another study that we did, and all the processes that were tested. And then we can rank them in order of what is the percentage of odor emission that's coming from the plant from each one of these sources. So this particular one, the gravity thickener was 47%, and the next one was the plant headworks, in the purple there, was 38%. So what does that tell us? That tells us that we need to zero in on these two processes right away. They're critical processes for us to capture and treat the air associated with that. And if we were to do that at this particular plant, we would have gotten 85% of the odors coming from the plant just with those two processes. The other thing we do is conduct odor dispersion modeling. Odor dispersion modeling takes into account local terrain, your local topography, and your local meteorological data. And also the results of our odor testing that we already talked about. The results of the odor testing go into the model, it combines it with the local terrain or local meteorological data, and then it disperses the odors throughout the year. It goes through a whole year of meteorological data, and it predicts, well, what's that going to look like? And so you would see your treatment plant there and the neighborhoods surrounding it, and those contours, those lines and numbers associated with that, what those mean is it's a relative strength of odor. And so as you would imagine, the closer to the plant you have, those numbers are higher. It's a stronger odor. The farther you get, those numbers get lower and lower. So we can actually visually show the impacts of the existing plant, and then this same tool would be used to evaluate our different odor control technology options. So as we go, we'd model each option that we're looking at, and if we were to control sources A, B, and C, we'd run the model again and show, okay, what would be the impact of that? And it helps us to evaluate what our options are. The model will also give us this result too. These are frequency contours. And instead of giving us the peak or the concentration of odor, how strong the odor is, in this presentation, it gives you how many times a year would the model predict that there'd be any type of odor coming off of the plant. And let me just say to you, this is not your plant. This is another project. So these numbers have nothing to do with this project. But in this particular case, right around the plant, they would have expected to see 2,000 times a year there'd be some kind of odor being detected. And as you would expect, the farther away, those frequencies get less and less. So then we get down to what we want to know. We develop our odor control alternatives. And we look at the technologies. We know all the viable technologies that are out there that are available. And there's a lot of odor control technologies that are not viable and people shouldn't be selling, but they're out there too. But the ones that we would look at would be a biological option. Those are things such as bioscrubbers, biofilters, and again, if you want to ask me more questions about that afterwards, I won't get into that right now. A physical technology, it's where the compounds would literally adhere to substrates such as carbon. There's other options too, but that's just the most common one. And chemical options, those are wet scrubbers like you have now, other dry media chemical options. And then there's the options of single stage versus multi-stage in order to meet our objectives. So we're going to determine the best available odor control technology, and we're going to estimate the operating and capital cost over a 20-year period. We'll figure out what's the best bang for the buck. Advantages and disadvantages of each one as well. And then, of course, we would provide a report. We would give our conclusions, our recommendations based on the data. We would submit those for review by the city. And then, according to the review comments, we would finalize that report and submit. That's our proposed schedule, which if we were to do the schedule as we show in our proposal, that report will be finalized in mid-July. The only thing I did want to point out, though, in this schedule is that if we were to conduct the schedule like this in order to get our final report in by July, the sampling program, which is here, would be done in March, early March, which is still pretty cool as far as the weather is concerned. And we would really recommend if we do it this way and try to accelerate things the way this is shown, that we do recommend having one additional round of testing that we would do in warm weather in June, so that we can verify that our results are similar in the warm weather as they were in the cool weather, because those results will be a little bit different. And we need to make sure that the recommendations that we made based on the cool weather data are in line with what we see in the warm weather data. If the decision is made that we only want one round of testing, we don't want to, because obviously it costs more to have 2 rounds of testing, then we would recommend that we not follow this aggressive schedule, that we would put the testing, take that March testing and move it down to June somewhere, but of course it would push the whole schedule down along with it. That's all I have. Thank you.
Very good. Would you care to add anything to that presentation? Very thorough. Excellent, all right. Well, if you'd like to take your seat, then we'll open it up for questions and comments from the group, and we'll work our way around the table. Excuse me. I didn't mean to do that. Mayor Pro Tem Rhodes, would you mind beginning, and then we'll work our way to Mr. Seal, and then jump over to Councilwoman Dillon McClellan and Councilman Gearwald.
Yeah, that's fine. I think you must have been reading my mind as you were going through, because all of the questions that I had, you addressed in your presentation.
Great.
Yeah, the only thing that's left, I suppose, is what degree of accuracy do you expect that your final recommendations will be? What level of confidence do you have in that?
Do I push this?
Yep, it's on. So long as the green light is on.
Okay, got it.
It's working.
What the recommendations will be based on is the best available technology, and in that technology, we would have a specified removal efficiency of particular compounds and odor. And that would be actually, if it's a manufactured type system, those are actually guaranteed by the manufacturer. So the level of confidence is high, and it's based on the level of success we've had on many projects that are very similar to this. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Probably as well as what it can be at this point.
Yeah.
Anything further, Mr. Rhodes? Thank you, sir. Mr. Seal?
Yes, sir. If, in fact, we engage in a second round of testing in warm weather, instead of pushing the whole thing back, do you have any idea how much additional cost that would entail?
Yes, I believe I have a line item in the proposal for that. Yeah, it'd be $15,270 for the additional round of testing, which includes all the time and laboratory expenses and all of that. I would also add to that too that it would extend that July date a little bit, not as if we waited for the whole thing to start then though. So I would anticipate maybe that date would be moved into, that final date would be moved into August at that point if we did the second round of testing. But we'd have already a good handle on where we were going.
If you did not do a second round of testing, but rather just push the whole project back, so you did your initial testing, you're only testing in warm weather, would that also result in the same date? End date?
No, that would result in a farther away date because there's a lot of the preliminary information and evaluation that we can do based on the cool weather data. And our idea would be that the warm weather data would verify what we've already done, or if we need to make revisions, that we can do so, but do so efficiently at that point.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else, Mr. Seal?
No, sir.
Thank you, sir. Ms. McClellan, you want to make sure that Councilwoman Dillon has the microphone? And Councilwoman Dillon, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm actually going to start with questions for Todd. Todd, do we know how many people toured the facility? Did you receive comments from any of them? Did you receive?
We didn't receive any written comments, but there were comments by the people while they were on tour.
Okay. Was there any compilation of those comments, our comments, from being out there? I'm just wondering, like, did everybody get to the same point and go, wow, it really stinks right here?
Yeah, actually, there was a
Bob, the microphone a little bit closer.
there was a consensus among most of the people where the odors were coming from while they were on the tour. So, but we didn't compile the comments. Most of them were pretty general statements.
Okay. Because can we just, I mean, in lieu of spending all this money, can we just address those areas directly? Instead of doing a full-blown study. If we know that there's smell coming from certain areas, can't we just address those areas?
Certainly, Bob, if you want to comment, but my understanding is that's kind of what we did last time, back in 2000, 2001, and we didn't accomplish our goals. So this way is using the scientific data and analysis to determine where exactly and what exactly and how best to resolve.
There's also a question of if we do increase the odor scrubbers, the areas that are being drawn off by the odor scrubber, we need to increase the capacity of the odor scrubber itself.
Okay.
And that would require an engineering work to determine what we would need to go to. So there's no easy, quick solution. You can't, without knowing where to spend the money or what kind of technology to spend the money on, I don't think it was wise to do it that way.
Okay. I just feel like we're just constantly chasing this, and it's just doing a lot of, we're not quite getting there.
I can speak to that just for a second.
Sure.
Okay.
Please.
I think when you do a plant tour, something that does happen is that you get near certain sources and you're like, oh, that's awful, and it is true. But many times, what we find is that those aren't actually the sources that are carrying off site, because you might stand next to a dumpster and say, oh, that's it. But the reality is it's a much larger tank that maybe when you're next to it, it's not as offensive to you, but because of the volume of air that's coming off of it, that's really what's causing our issues outside the fence line, which is what the testing and the modeling would help to identify. So just just to comment on what you're asking about the site tour, that happens often, that people end up identifying something and that really, sometimes it is, but many times it's actually not the biggest source that there is. So, for instance, with the stacks with the odor scrubbers that are there, the chemical scrubbers, there's really no way to go and smell what's coming out the top of those and have any idea of what's coming out of them, and you won't know until you are somewhere where the plume of that air is coming down, which is probably pretty far away, to know if it's actually being effective or not.
Okay. So are you, so I guess what I want to move on to is, so are you recommending going more to a biological versus a chemical?
No, I have no recommendations at this point. We haven't done any testing, nothing. I do know that there has been, in the cases that I presented up there, there's been in our history at least a few where the chemical scrubber option was a more expensive option and the biological option became something that was a cheaper option in the long run and more effective. But it really is based on the loadings that are coming into it, and I don't know what those are. Biological system does require a minimum amount of loadings because you're keeping the microbes alive. They're the ones doing the work for you, whereas a chemical scrubber doesn't care what's coming in. It's chemicals. So.
And I guess my last question for you is, your other projects, are we doing apples to apples comparison here? Are they similar setups for treatment plants? Because I know ours is a little unique the way if it were built today, it would be different.
Very much different.
Right. Well, they have RBCs. We're
Right.
completing a design for a treatment plant in Pennsylvania that has RBCs currently right now. That study actually found that the RBCs in that particular plant were not the problem, and they are not even being treated. I'm not saying that's the case here. My point is that every plant is different, you're right, but the approach is to tailor the study and that design for that particular plant. This first stage, this study stage, is just to identify and make recommendations and give costs associated with each one of those for you guys to decide what to do with.
So then, just for clarification, how long would you actually be doing air studies?
You mean the actual sampling?
The actual sampling.
It's just 1 week of sampling. The sampling would just be done for that 1 week.
Okay. So you're not concerned about weather or that sort of thing with just that one random sample? I know you're talking about moving it out to summer, but we seem to have issues year-round, so
Right.
I think that's...
Well, that would be the benefit of having 2 rounds, and often people do that for that exact reason, is it gives you two points, but the only way around that would be to do another, to keep going, but
Right.
like you see, it costs, so it's a matter of, there's a break point there where it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to do more. More data is always better from an engineering standpoint, but there's also a place and a time where you can't get any more data. It's just too expensive.
Bob, have you tracked timing and weather conditions?
We track every odor complaint as far, we have a form, we track weather conditions, wind directions, where the location of the complaint is coming from. I think a lot of the testing he's referring to is actually in the system itself,
Right.
more so than the neighborhoods.
But have you seen any patterns?
As far as geographical,
Right.
oh yes. Usually, the prevailing winds come out of the southwest, so it's blowing everything to the northeast. That's why we get a majority of the complaints, I feel, around Crestwood, Marcana Court, the winds out of the south.
Thank you very much.
Ms. McClellan?
Yeah, so you answered a bunch of the questions that I had written down here, so just, if we only do the warm weather data, is it still going to be necessary to do the cool weather? I guess we kind of answered that in the previous question here, but, are you recommending that you have a cold weather and a warm weather, or does the warm weather usually give you all the data that you need for the cold weather as well?
Right. Typically, the warm weather is going to be a worse condition than the cool weather. That is generally true. The reason to do the cool weather is that it gives you an additional set of data, like we just talked about, but it also gets the project moving along so that we can get our recommendations and preliminary conclusions together. It would speed up the schedule.
And then you're pretty confident that the chances of catching the data that you need within that 1 week are pretty good, even if it's not like a terrible, I mean, I live across the street, I live on West Henry, so I live right in the, whatever you want, I can't talk today. It's Thursday, but it feels like Monday. But, even if it's not a bad week, you're still pretty confident that you could catch the data that you need out of that, even if it's not a terrible week for it.
Typically, you're probably experiencing meteorological changes rather than process changes in general, because if the plant influent is somewhat steady, then you're not going to see these radical changes happening from week to week. So.
And then I don't know if you can talk a little bit about, I mean, you did a little bit in your presentation, but are we talking about a major cost savings to doing the study? I mean, initially, obviously, there's an investment, but the cost savings going forward from changing from a chemical to a biological scrubber?
Right.
That kind of thing. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Well, the study would have to conclude that a biological system would be an efficient system for that, and there's a couple things. One is that the biological system is good at removing most compounds, actually, but there's a couple that they have a hard time with, so we'd have to make sure that those compounds are not there. And that also needs consistent loading, so it can't be that in the middle of the night the loadings just drop off or something, or that the loadings are so low all the time that the microbes don't have a chance to ever acclimate. So you have to have enough for those microbes to do the work, but if those things are in place, then the biological really is a great option, because you're depending on microbes-free work to oxidize these compounds rather than paying chemicals to pour over it. And ultimately, it will be, it can be a cost savings over a period of time. I mean, obviously, you have the initial cost of a new system.
Right.
But depending on how long in the future we want to look at this, like I shared in the presentation, there are many times it's a really good option to consider.
And then you talked about, the loading. Does the fact that we take in septage from other locations or other areas, does that help in that kind of a situation then? If we're taking in additional load to help the system to work better, if we ended up going with that kind of a thing?
It could. Septage is typically intermittent, I would expect. I'm not sure exactly how you guys take it in, but I would expect that it's intermittent. That would need to be taken into consideration into the design for sure.
Okay. I think that's it for me. Thank you.
Councilwoman. Mr. Beerbaum?
Just a couple questions regarding when you're assessing what's currently there in terms of our current odor abatement, because I kind of disagree with the city manager that it worked well for approximately 12, 13 years until we started doing this construction, and then all of a sudden issues started arising. How will you be assessing our current system? Because I don't necessarily want to throw out a $1.2 million investment to all of a sudden now have to replace it with another $2 million assessment that really isn't so necessarily needing to be done, where basically we just need to do some fixes, and as Ms. Jana had mentioned, that we would be addressing those fixes that we currently have identified. So is that part of the study, or are you looking at a whole, throw away the mousetrap and build a new one?
No, it would be an evaluation of that existing system. So we would evaluate the performance. So we would be doing air testing in the stacks of those chemical scrubbers and on the inlets of those scrubbers, testing the airflows in the scrubbers, the chemical feed rates, the chemical usage, what you're paying, all of that. And so if they're working efficiently, and the chemical cost and handling is not an issue to the city, then there would be no reason to replace them.
Because I think that's where I've seen some issues that I think, and also, will you be assessing the processes? Because I think some of them have changed from, and my understanding from Mr. Skull, those have changed from what we were doing 2 or 3 years ago. And that's part of this also, assessing what kind of waste is coming in and how that waste is being processed and so forth?
We would do, right, we would do liquid testing that would tell us the liquid characteristics at each stage. Now, if you're talking about going through each process and making recommendations to their process of how they treat the wastewater, that's not typically what we would be doing, no.
But you will be assessing to determine if there's chemicals or something in there that could be now causing the issue that probably couldn't have been
Right.
present years ago?
Correct.
The other aspect, understanding from the atmospheric conditions, there's been a great deal of those where I know that it's been happening, we know in the summer and so forth. Do you feel this is the right time of year to do this? When, I don't know if we've experienced as much problems during November and December as we normally have had, usually either January or February, when it's really extremely cold and the air is still. And I think that's the time that it happens during the summer too, when we have humidity or when it's really dead. So I don't know if the timing of this year is going to be sufficient to produce what kind of smells and things that we have, especially if you're doing that wider area assessment.
And you're talking about the dispersion modeling?
Yes.
Okay. Well, with the dispersion modeling, we're going to capture a year's worth of data, of meteorological data. So we would take, let's say, year 2015 of meteorological data, and it has an hour of every hour of every day of that entire year that would go into the model. So when that model runs, what it does is it runs every hour. And so it takes that first hour of 2015 and it says, okay, under this condition, this is what it would look like. Then it goes to the next hour, under this condition, this is what it would look like. And then at the end of it, it spits out, here was your worst hour of all of 2015, and this is what it looked like.
So making the assumption that these conditions were in place in terms of the odor or whatever, then it will spread out based on those weather conditions?
That's correct. Right.
Okay. I believe that's it for me right now. Thank you.
Good, Mr. Gearbo? Okay. Any other questions at the moment? Well, let me ask one, and then we'll try and transition to developing a consensus on how we would like to move forward. Mr. Scull, I have a question for you, and I'm almost 99% positive in the answer, but I just want to confirm it for the record. Assuming that this proposal is adopted and there are two separate analyses done, one in the spring and one in the summer, we're not anticipating any serious work at the wastewater treatment plant during that period, is that correct?
No, sir, we're not.
Okay, very good. Because I know one of the things that I'm keenly aware of is that our plant is a system, it's a process, and when you disrupt one segment of that process, it could ultimately skew some of the data and some of the results. Let me thank you for your presentation, and your credentials are pretty impressive. This is, as you indicated at the beginning of your presentation, this is all that you do. And you've worked in a lot of different wastewater treatment plants all over North America, I understand, from reading your report. I am in favor of engaging your services for the two recommendations you enumerated towards the end of your analysis, where we will be collecting data in both March and June. I think that the time has come, as it relates to this odor issue, to collect scientific data. We talk a lot about making data-driven decisions and policy making, and I think we need this data. So I'm very comfortable moving forward. I will acknowledge for the record, I wish that the schedule was, that we could expedite it more, but I think the goal is to be thorough and do a complete analysis, and in keeping with that promise, I mean, you're going to have to take some time to collect the data and to evaluate it. Again, I appreciate your presentation this evening. It was very thorough. I think my colleagues asked some excellent questions, and like I said, I'm interested in moving forward. And if the group council, if the majority of council is interested in moving forward, unless staff tells me otherwise, I see no reason why this couldn't be an action item on our next council meeting agenda on November the 14th. Is that correct? Okay, very good. Can we start, Mr. Rhodes? Actually, we'll work our way around the table one more time. If you have additional questions, ask them, but I'm also looking for consensus on how you would like to move forward.
No additional questions, and I support the engaging these firms to do the study to include the second sampling.
I'm also in favor of both samplings. I do have a question. Mr. Scull, when we were down there, we discussed the fact that sometimes some of the processes that take place, especially in our industrial park or in some of the particular sorts of businesses that are known to contribute more to difficulty in the waste stream. Are those on a pretty consistent basis, so this kind of a sampling would catch them? Or do they dump on an irregular basis that would make it more difficult?
The industries you're referring to are on a very regular basis.
Okay, all right, very good, thank you.
Ms. Dillon, you want to make sure you have the microphone?
Thank you. I just have one more question for Mr. Skull. We didn't hear anything from him as to how, I mean, you live and breathe this every day. I mean, are you comfortable with this type of a process?
I am, actually. It's very impressive. In the previous study, we had a very cursory study of the source of the odors, what type they were. They sulfur or were they the mercaptans? This is much more thorough. This is unlike anything I've seen, so I think it's a great study.
So you feel confident that this would give us the best results possible, the most accurate results?
I would prefer more warmer weather sampling, because I think that's where most of the issues occur. But again, the sampling is mostly at the plant itself, so, and then we're pretty consistent temperature-wise there, so I think we'll get good sampling.
Thank you. I'll support this, but I'd like to see it done with just the one round of testing at optimal time.
Okay.
I'm curious if, like what Mr. Gearbaugh was mentioning, if the cold weather testing can or should be moved to, say, January, if that helps anything. I mean, if we're already going to do a warm weather test, is March cool enough? I mean, obviously March is cool, but I mean, January, February, when we've noticed that there have been kind of that still air, really cold testing.
I think, well, there's two things. One is, I don't think that the project will be ready for the testing yet. At January would be a little bit too quick to get that out and done. But at that temperature, I think, because the results, the air testing that we're going to take is directly from the processes and has nothing to do with the atmosphere going on. It has to do with the wastewater temperature. And my concern would be that it would be too cold and we wouldn't get valid results at that point.
Okay. No other questions, and I definitely support this, and I would support the 2 rounds of testing.
Very good.
Yeah, just a couple questions. On the first part where it's $85,000, and then we go into the second option where it says present findings to Board of Directors, $7,500, would that not occur with the first proposal? I'm not sure why there's an additional $7,500 to present the findings to us.
Well,
the second option.
That was something that was presented in the RFP, but in the base proposal, there are 2 workshops where, if you look at task 8, there's workshop number 1 where the results are presented for, that's the preliminary results before we actually develop our recommendations, and then task number 10, workshop number 2, where recommendations would be also described there as well. I believe the way that we scoped that is that we would be coming up and giving those presentations, and I don't see why that couldn't be done here rather than at the treatment plant. I don't know if Gary, you had something else in mind with, I was thinking the presenting of additional findings to the District Board of Directors was just a completely separate thing, another whole presentation that we would develop, and just that's outside of the space scope.
From my perspective, I'm fine with the first option. I would do the optional task if the results from the first exam, or the first round of testing don't prove to be adequate enough. I'm just from that perspective thinking we need to see what we get first and then go forward in the next option if we need to. But the other piece of it, I don't see why we would want to spend another $9,000 presenting findings that we're going to see the same thing as what we've seen in the first round.
Well, it sounds like that can be resolved.
Right.
There's some cost savings there that I think we can address it.
So just to be clear, it does sound like there's a majority favor the 2 separate analysis, one in March and one in June. Is that correct?
If needed.
Okay. All right. Very good. Any other comments from council? No? Gentlemen, would you care to make any additional comments? then this will be presented as an action item on our next council agenda, which is November the 14th, at a meeting beginning at 7:30 PM. And Mr. Campbell, between you, Mr. Rubel, and Mr. Scull, will you make sure to reach out and offer to sit down with Councilwoman Todd to debrief her on this and what the consensus is, and address any questions, concerns that she may have? Very good. Gentlemen, thank you again. Appreciate it very much. If there's nothing further on the wastewater treatment plant odor study, we'll transition then to a brief discussion on the North Ann Arbor streetscape. There were some supplementals distributed.
Public comment of this?
Mrs. Hess, the agenda indicates that there'll be public comment at the end of the discussion period, which is our
You
standard,
don't want us to say it.
which is our standard practice at all of our work meetings.
I wanted to speak to the gentleman.
So again, I guess at this time I'm going to turn it over to you, Mr. Campbell, to discuss this issue, what the problem is that we're attempting to resolve, and then we'll begin a discussion.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, in the packet of pictures and drawings and such that put out, to me, I think the best one that helps is this one right here. So, I believe everybody's probably been by there, or if they haven't, they've heard about it. And obviously and then the other the top picture shows the former, what it used to be. The reason the drastic change is because of the ADA requirements. You may recall that there's a fair amount of slope both on the sidewalk as well as what's called the cross slope, which was between the sidewalk and the curb. But there was a fair amount of slope, to make it ADA compliant, it had to be flattened out more. That's why it's such a large step now. Matter of fact, it's from that, you can see, on one of them, you can actually see there's a blue chalk line, and that blue chalk line is essentially the top of the brick, where the brick is going to be once they put that in there. And I think the tallest point is about 16 inches, so obviously excessive. And for liability, we certainly don't want folks getting hurt and that type of thing in the winter time, or any time for that matter. But so what we propose, working with the contractor, with Fishback, which is of course MDOT's representative, coming up with a railing, and there's a couple other photos.
Yeah, downtown Williamston and Old Town Lansing.
And so,
Williams.
very similar. Yep, absolutely. And so we would propose two one-step locations. One would be, and I tried to do that, I apologize, but I tried to do it with the black marker, and it's a little bit deceiving, but where the transition lane starts, so if you're southbound, there's a transition that goes into the right lane, and that transition, that actually starts right about, excuse me, right about where the former Detroit Dog and Presley Parrot, where those buildings come together. That's where the transition starts, and then is adjacent to the first parking space. And then we would propose one to the north, at the north end of the second parking space, which is about in front of the Carmody Law Firm door right there. Those kind of line up a little bit with the parking lot as well as the alley coming out from behind Dan's and Pineapple House. Then it would be railing, as you can see in this big picture, railing all the way from essentially the drive going into the Hartman Insurance property, all the way to the south end here by Key Bank. And it would be proposed similar to what's used already downtown near parking lot 4. And you can also, there's also, I had asked Main Street Design Team to take a look at it, and they have a recommendation that's included in your packet as well, which agrees with that. I'm sorry? Yes.
Pictures from them?
Yeah.
No,
No, they're rezoned.
No, we actually got those from Fishbeck.
Okay. But the design was even seen?
Yes.
when they, like this, okay.
The recommendation from, I'm on that team, the recommendation for the design team is pretty much consensus that simple is better, 2 openings, and then some kind of a fence that doesn't have something that goes all the way to the ground to catch leaves and, so that's basically what
Do you want to talk a little bit about cost?
Sure, cost is, the range is between 15 and 20,000 to do the rail and those steps.
Let me, real quick, do you have anything else to say before we open it up for questions?
Nope.
No? Okay. Mr. Gear, when do you want to begin? We'll work our way around the gas
Just
side. of it.
my own understanding, how did Fishback miss this? How designed it this way? I mean, did they?
Well, Fishbeck didn't design it. AECom would have designed it. Yeah.
They didn't realize that they were going to create the virtual hazard?
I've not asked that question yet, so I can't respond, but we will certainly follow up with that.
Just from my perspective, it's an engineering thing, and us now having to come forward with $15,000 to $20,000 to fix a problem that was designed, that could have been part of the original plan.
Well, part of it was that then the only way that it wouldn't have been done this way, because it had to be brought up to ADA standards, was to not do anything at all. So if we would have left it that way, I mean, which certainly, I guess, was an option, but if we wouldn't have, if to do anything, we would have had to bring it up to these standards.
This isn't ADA compliant either with this kind of drop-off,
And this is ADA compliant.
without any railing there and a 16-inch drop-off.
Correct, because, and I don't necessarily disagree, but the technicality part is it's the sidewalk, not the cross slope. And that's considered a cross slope.
From my perspective, I'm just saying it's a design flaw that I think the firm that did it should contribute to the cost of resolving this problem.
Mr. McCollum?
No question, well, I do have a question. On the openings, is the reasoning for having them down so far because there's no parking on, like, in front of Bill's Barber Shop?
Correct, we don't want,
Because it just feels like it's a long stretch of closed-up railing on the south side, or, yeah.
Right.
The south side versus the other side, but if you can't access, I guess that's the
correct,
reasoning.
correct.
Thank you. Mr. McCollum, still?
How will this impact the streetscape?
I don't understand. How will it impact the
This,
streetscape?
the railing, will it impact where the trees are going, where the grates are? the
No.
vegetables? There's no impact to that whatsoever?
No,
Because
it's-
those are all on the lower tier?
Correct. This will be surface mounted on the top of the wall.
Okay. And how tall is the fence?
That is yet to be determined.
Have we talked to Key Bank and Bill's Barber Shop or any of these other merchants that are in that area and see how they feel about this?
I've talked to Bill, and I know, I believe Jill Durnan from Hartman, but that's it.
Okay.
But from a liability standpoint, I mean, something needs to be,
Oh, absolutely, but I'm just saying that in front of Bill's, it's going to look like there's a fortress where there's a fence, and it's not going to be as easy access with people running across the road to him.
we want...
I know we don't want to encourage people to
Exactly.
jaywalk.
Exactly.
I know that, but it's a perception.
Well, that's why we're actually proposed that second, that's why it's right at the end of or the beginning of the transition lane where it is adjacent to or butts up against the first parking space.
Okay.
So to put that in as early as possible, if you will.
So I guess I'd like to see it more live as to where this is. I'm having a hard time figuring out where you're saying parking spaces are. What I want to make sure is that there will not be people that park in front of where these entrances are.
Well, there will be, and that's why you walk up and down the cross slope of the brick is for walking up and down.
The parking spaces that were there before will be preserved.
Right.
Yeah.
You can't see it very well on that drawing, but you can see it a lot better on this drawing, where you still have, what, 2 feet?
Yeah, you still have the
3 feet
lower-
lower tier that would be for walking in
Correct.
front, like it was before, and then you just have to get up to the upper tier, you're just gonna have to go through one of these 2 steps.
Correct.
My question, I do have, sorry, I didn't mean to jump in on you, Janet, but is there as much of a height difference on the key bank side as there is in the middle and on this end, that you could maybe move it down a little bit so that the fencing isn't quite as long, doesn't go all the way to the edge of key bank? So that like there's only a 1 step, is there only a 1 step
Correct.
in front of key bank that you could just start the railing in front of Bill's and move over and have that 1 step just be open in front of key bank instead of having railing all the way to the front of key bank?
Well, I mean,
I guess I'm wondering what the height there is. That makes sense, am I making sense?
well, it's still,
Right.
That's the 0 point. That's where the upper level meets the brick level. That's the 0 point.
So they're the same there.
The point where the railing stops and ends is where the slopes meet. The bottom slope, the top slope meet. Look at it.
Okay. So you're not, I was just thinking, can you get away with moving the railing down a little bit so that you have, because you're gonna have a step here anyway, right? 6 to 10 inches or whatever it is?
it's still going to be a significant step in front of Bill's.
Well, I'm saying, yeah, keeping the railing in front of Bill still, but maybe losing it in front of Key Bank, where you have only a, 6-inch to 10-inch step.
Ms. Zoll, did you have anything else?
I just wanted to make sure, I don't know if it's just a perception of the picture, but it sort of is what I think Heidi's talking about. Is it actually lower here? Is this sort of a hump in the middle, in front of where Detroit Dog was? Is that the highest point, and then it
16
tapers,
inches.
then it tapers back down?
Correct.
So then theoretically, I'm hoping that the fencing then will sort of mask that, and it would look sort of like,
It'll look uniform.
It'll look
correct,
uniform.
Right. So where it actually will be taller in the lower spots, because it'll be the same height, right?
right,
That makes sense? So it won't,
right. So,
well, my understanding was it was just gonna be higher where it's low, and the low, it'll be level. It'll be level across. Top. Correct.
Anything else, Ms. Dillon?
I just wanted to ask, I guess I wanted to know about this lower tier now. Is that going to be just dead space? Theoretically, if there were to be a business, would they have cafe seating on that lower level?
I don't believe there's.
Is there
it's
ample
not-
space to that?
No.
It's really hard to tell by,
No,
it's a little deceptive on some of these drawings as to how much space there is left.
it's about 3 feet or so. So it
Okay,
wouldn't,
so it's just really just going to be dead space?
it'll be walking space.
Right, but I'm just saying, because the upper tier will not, like when Detroit Dog was there, they sort of had tables out there.
Right, as did,
And Draws America did also. So we would not do that. Would we consider putting are we going to be putting benches in that lower area versus the upper area?
I think so, I can't remember, Gary, do you recall where the benches are located? I don't recall.
The street furniture is for the brick areas.
That's what I thought, yeah.
Either on Michigan Avenue or whatever street. The brick area is the area for the street furniture, which is the trash containers, bike racks, and the seating. So they're dispersed throughout the brick areas.
Okay, so
I don't know
that's the lower
I
tier.
don't know the exact location of it.
But there isn't brick on the upper level,
Correct.
so then it is, everything would be down below. Okay,
Concrete level only is for traffic.
okay, right.
Correct.
There's a bench right there.
Anything else, Ms. Dillon?
Apparently not, no thank you.
Okay. Mr. Seo?
I guess I concur with Mr. Gearbaugh. When I first drove up there after they completed the Ann Arbor, they opened that. drove through there with my wife, and I said, that can't stand the way that is, that's way too high. So it seems to me like that should have been somehow predicted or foreseen in the design process, and I guess I agree that it seems a shame that we now have to bear additional costs to make up for that kind of a...
Thank you, sir. Anything else? No? Mr. Rhodes?
Two things. One is sort of following up on the last comment. If it had been detected early, would we still have ended up paying for it anyway because it's streetscape and it's not on Michigan Avenue? If they had told us right up front that we're going to need to put a fence up?
Right, and I don't, I mean, we got pretty much the maximum amount of the grant, but, I mean, it may have been I'd have to double check and see if it was a grant eligible item, so some of the costs could have been shared.
So if it wasn't, then the fact that we have to pay for it now is kind of irrelevant, because we would have had to pay for it anyway. The only question I had was the width of the openings. Are they going to be single passage openings, or more like the Williamson thing where it's double? Any thought?
We hadn't decided one way or the other, so that was, I mean, my hope here was to get insight from you all and see what your thoughts were, but it could be either.
Was that an item, Heidi, of discussion at the design team?
I
The width of
don't
the
recall if
opening?
that was, no.
Real quick, Mr. Gearbo, I'll turn to you. I actually hadn't thought about, Mr. Gearbo, your point about AECom or URS missing this during the design phase, but I actually concur with you and with Mr. Seal. I don't think we have anything to lose by approaching them and indicating that there's some level of frustration that this was missed, and to inquire if they would be willing to share some of the costs. I think this absolutely has to be done one way or the other, but I think to approach them would be appropriate. The other thing, in addition to communicating directly with Bill's Barbershop and Hartman Insurance, I think some sort of communique should be sent to KeyBank and to Keith Larder, the owner of the two other properties, as well as what would be Jill Durner and her father Al, who own the Carmody Law Firm. Not so much for feedback, but just to let them know that something will ultimately need to be done so they're not blindsided when council takes this action. That's all I have. Mr. Gearbo?
Yeah, just real quick, where exactly on here does parking start and stop? Is it right in front of Bill's, or?
The northernmost parking space before the transition to the turn lane,
Right?
the northmost parking space is right in front of that first opening. That says proposed opening and step.
To the north side?
That's the north, I'm sorry, I got my... South. The southmost, yeah.
So closer to Michigan Avenue.
The two gaps.
So right about where it says the trade dog and...
No, where it says proposed opening and step.
I see that, but if I'm looking at the actual photo, which,
It's actually Chelsea Perry doing the new one.
Oh, okay.
That's his first...
so it's not between Bill's Barbers and Bill's Dog?
No,
The only reason I was thinking is that if you put another step in between Bill's Barber and between the hot dog place, at least you'd have consistency so you could get up into that. I didn't realize that you could walk along the brick in there, that it was wide enough. My other concern being that you might smack your head into the trees, but the only thing is I would put a third one in there so that you have the ability to get into all three shops by walking along that. I think that would make it most beneficial.
You're walking on the concrete, not walking on the bricks.
Right, and so as far as encourage to,
Get out of a car though, you're gonna walk one way or the other.
right, but you're not getting out of a car in front of Bill's, because it's the transition lane.
Turn lane.
That is a transition lane.
But you are getting out of one in front of your house and Parrot.
Correct, that's the first, that's basically about,
Immediately get out, and walk up. Got it?
correct, yep.
Mr. Seal?
You know, initially that struck me too, that there's a great distance there. Maybe what we could do to help relieve that a little bit would be to make that southernmost entry a double wide, and the other one further north, a single wide. Just a thought.
I'd want at least one to be double.
Right. The only other thing too, and I talked to Mr. Campbell about a potential option that should restaurants go in there or something at point, that we'd be able to put some kind of a, what do they call it? Something on top of the railing, kind of like what they had done around the trees before, so you could use it like a counter, so that could be a benefit to whoever opens a restaurant in there.
Any additional questions? Ms. McClellan, please.
Just wanted to note that the, the design team, the Main Street design team, sees this sort of as an opportunity to use planter boxes and garland and that kind of thing on there, and that's all sponsored by outside donations and stuff, so.
All right, does anyone have any objection then if Mr. Campbell proceeds with contacting URS to talk about sharing in the cost, and then also contacting the adjacent business owners or property owners to inform them of this, it's essentially a requirement, not quite a requirement, but we need to do it. Everyone good with that? Okay. Mr. Campbell, you can report back then on the 14th? Okay. Ms. Dillon?
I have one last question. Are we doing anything about it currently? Are we putting cones or anything there to just have a visual so people understand that that's there?
Not currently, we're not.
Are we going to put any kind of cones or caution tape in the
Well,
meantime? Because now that we know it's an issue,
Well,
we really should address it somehow.
We can ask Hoffman Brothers if they want to, since it's still their construction zone.
Okay.
They haven't relinquished it back to us at this point.
Right. I'm just concerned that when it's time for the tree lighting and stuff, you're going to have a lot of people in that area in the dark.
So you'll contact Hoffman Brothers about that? Okay.
So we won't accept it until we have to place.
I guess, so,
So with these comments, if I might, not to steal anything from the mayor, but is a consensus to move forward, or?
I don't think anyone disagrees.
Okay.
It has to be
Yeah.
done.
Okay.
It's just that I think we need an explanation as to how it's
Sure.
this happens.
Certainly. Very good, thank you.
If they want to just say it was missed and here's some money, that's...
Sure.
Yeah, okay. Just so we're on the same page. Anything else as it relates to the North Ann Arbor Street streetscape? No? Okay, very good. Is there anything further to be brought forward at this city council work meeting this evening? No, then we come to citizen comments. Under the Open Meetings Act, any citizen may come forward at this time, make comment or question to city council. This public comment period will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested but not required to state his or her name and address for the record. And please make your way to the podium and speak into the microphone if you would.
Mary Hess, the gentleman that was talking about the study and talking about variables, the city years ago did not get in the outside trap business. We now take a lot of septic sludge from the townships. And I think the variables would be no septic tank sludge and taking in sludge. Now, apparently, there's been a time that we have not taken it in. So I think that has a big impact on the area. Also, I guess when we're talking, they're Ypsilanti, or the Ypsilanti Community Utilities Authority, you did a project for them in 2013. It would be nice if the council would contact them on how happy they were with what you did, because it apparently addresses liquid sludge storage tank. So that could, I think, be septic tank things also. I think that there has been a concern. I live on Canterbury. I have never smelled anything until the last 3 or 4 years. The comment as far as, well, you live near a sewer plant, therefore it smells. I was on city council when we did the last project in 2001 and the project before. And we were told at that time, by the engineer that we should not take outside sludge because the effluent, a gallon of that, is so hundreds % stronger than a gallon of household effluent. And the machinery is not built to take on that type of heavy stuff. And I notice we keep putting more money into septic sludge. The other comment is regarding when we're talking about ADA and sidewalks. Mr. Philippe's sidewalk on South Harris, the sidewalk, a portion of it goes like this and then a portion goes like this for his ramp to drive his cars up to the side of the building. It is very unsafe because it is on an angle, and I would ask that the city would also address the safety of that, because Mr. Philippe's is parking vehicles over the sidewalk that is flat, so therefore you only have the other side that is on a slant for people to walk. I don't think sidewalks were meant to build like that opposed to flat. If you would have a chance to see, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Hess. Are there additional citizen comments?
Yes, my name is Bonnie Armbruster. I live at 205 Circle Court on the banks of the sewage stench. I doubt 3 minutes is going to do it, so maybe Mr. Seal will have to escort me out of here. My home is worth nothing. I've had 3 people come and look at it. I can't sell it. I bought this house. I walk the neighborhood on Circle Court asking people about the treatment plant that was so small at the time you barely knew it was there. During the time that Mark Hopper was mayor, I came home from work one day to bulldozers and earth movers and ate sand for the next 2 years, not being able to have windows, doors open, work in my yard that I dearly love gardening and being in. So to Mr. Gearbaugh, who said to me once, well, you bought the house, you knew it was there. Thank you for that comment. I checked with everybody on my street and I had no complaints for 13 years until that plant was expanded, and it smelled almost 24/7 since then. And you can call me anything you want. I have sent emails, they weren't very nice, and I apologize to you guys for that, but I'll tell you right now, if I have to get an attorney and file something against the city or each individual involved, I'm going to do it. Because I can't sell my property, I can't have my windows open, I have just shy of an acre there, it's beautiful. But I can't work in it all summer long, enjoy my property. It's been beyond horrible. Now, if any one of you'd like to raise your hand that you'd like to pay $200,000 for my property, of which my bank says it's worth, I'd like you to raise your hand now and I'd be happy to sell it to you. But there's not one of you sitting here that would want to live breathing sewage stench. I open my bedroom window a few inches thinking, oh, it's nice out tonight. I can open my windows and breathe and have some nice fresh air to come in. Only to wake up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning with my nostrils and my eyes burning from sewage stench and chemical burn. I'm not in really good health right now, and I am almost positive this treatment plant odor has caused it. Is what you're doing, what you're going to be doing, going to serve this purpose and take it away? 24/7 of stench, I've had enough.
Thank you, Mrs. Armbruster. Your time has expired.
Of course, you would do that to me.
Thank you. Are there additional citizen
I think
comments?
that's incredibly rude.
Well, that's the standard that's been set by this body, and...
Well, you know what, Brian?
Mrs. Armbruster, you've had your opportunity.
You know
You've
what
had your
you're gonna
opportunity.
say,
Well,
what
we're
you
gonna,
wanna say.
we're gonna move on. Are there additional citizen comments on agenda items?
Of course you are.
There are none. So the chair would entertain a motion then to adjourn unless there's anything further at, let's say that's 8:16 PM.
So moved.
Moved by Councilwoman Dillon. Is there a second? Seconded by Councilmember Gearбall. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. This meeting is adjourned.